Well, good afternoon to everyone who's joined us live in this stream today. We are right now streaming live simultaneously across Facebook, LinkedIn, and our YouTube channels. So, a very warm welcome to all. I'm Ruchi Agarwal, Director of the Business Development at the Lincoln International Business School at the University of Lincoln. So, as the business school of the region, our work keeps us very close to our stakeholders, businesses, academics, students, and we always take great care to ensure that we provide platforms for these groups to interact. Now, this historic moment in time that we find ourselves in made us actually realize the array of innovation and the strength of resilience displayed by our stakeholders. And we felt we just had to create a platform to share, to learn, to grow, and perhaps even leave a legacy. So, Resilient Lincolnshire was then conceptualized in partnership with the Center for Organizational Resilience. We started an executive education series, which you can see, which you can link into on our YouTube channel as well, which is our academics sharing knowledge about issues that matter to businesses in these times. Today, you are with us for the second episode of what we call Resilient Lincolnshire Business Beyond the Curve. Now, this is conceptualized as a series of conversations with key figures and key voices in Greater Lincolnshire, essentially to explore the impact of this moment in history, to recognize innovation, and really to examine how we can all brace ourselves for business beyond the curve, to prepare ourselves better for it, for that future. So as we go through the session, you please do keep your comments, your questions, your answers going, because we will get time to look at them in the Q&A section, and we'll keep picking them up as we go along as well. Our inaugural speaker of episode 1 was Pat Doody, the chair of the GLAB. It was very well received, and thank you so much for your comments and your questions and the views that we still keep getting through on those. So for today, which is episode 2, we've picked a topic that's very widely relevant to all businesses. All of you perhaps consider and look at this aspect quite often, which is business continuity by being cyber secure. And we've got a number of guests in the studio today with us. So we have Yvonne James, who I'd like to introduce as our senior lecturer in computer science, specializing in cybersecurity. So we have a lot of expertise from the university in there. We also have joining us Simon Beardsley, who perhaps needs little introduction to businesses, who's the chief executive of the Lincolnshire Chamber of Commerce. And it's our pleasure to have Simon here with us today on this panel. And our third panelist today is Paul Burrows. A lot of you have told me that you know him as well, which is excellent. And Paul is the founder and chief executive of KryptoKloud. In conversation with our panel, which is our 3 guest speakers today, is Dr. Craig Marsh, who's a very well-known personality in Lincolnshire already. He's the Pro-Vice Chancellor, Director of the Lincoln International Business School. And it's always a pleasure to listen to Craig and to have him with us interviewing in the series. So Craig, a very warm welcome to you, and it's wonderful to see you here today.
Thank you, Rishi, and thank you so much for the introductions. And it's great to be here with our guests this afternoon. And actually, my job is relatively easy this afternoon because I don't know very much about cybersecurity myself. So my job is to extract as much information from our guests this afternoon as I can. So it's great to have you all with us, Paul, Simon, and Yvonne. And thank you for joining us. And I think perhaps it might be worth us starting just by kind of setting out what the field of cybersecurity is. So perhaps for anybody listening who isn't necessarily familiar with what we mean by cybersecurity. So Yvonne, perhaps I could start with you as our academic expert in cybersecurity, if that's okay. Could you perhaps just start it off by saying what is the field of cybersecurity? What are the things that cybersecurity entails for us, Yvonne?
Gosh, cybersecurity is a huge field and it covers an awful lot more than people ever give it credit for, really. We generally think about cybersecurity as affecting our data, as affecting our networks, affecting our computer systems. And we very often think about it in just that context. How do I make sure that my network, that my computers are safe, that nobody can get into my systems, nobody can get my data, nobody can go in there and make changes to anything I've got in there, nobody can destroy data. And we think about it very much in those sort of terms, but actually it's a much, much broader field than that. So it's not just about protecting the data and protecting the systems, it's also about how we manage our people, what assets they're allowed access to, how we do the resource management. Identity management is a huge part of cybersecurity now. And also at the other end of the scale, how we look after things like physical systems. So who's allowed access to what kind of access do we have? Are we using swipe cards? Are we using other kinds of technologies, things like biometrics, for example, that will allow us to have access to systems and allow the right people to have access? And the way that we manage all that, and it all comes together and all very much interlinks. But on top of that, an awful lot of it is about being cyber aware, about understanding the context of any sort of attack. You don't need to be a computer scientist to understand this sort of stuff, but you have to be very vigilant these days, and you have to have some knowledge about what's going on in the world. And I'm sure that Paul would back me up on that kind of statement, that in order for a business to maintain levels of security, they have to train their staff. They have to make sure that staff know at least the very basics of cybersecurity, so they can become cyber aware, and so they can fish out things like a phishing email, for example. They do know when one of those comes into their organisation, and they know how to respond accordingly. So so cybersecurity is not just about one little thing. It's not just about our systems and our data. It's now become a very, very broad term and covers a huge number of different topics.
Yvonne, thank you for that. That's a great general introduction to the range of different types of topic and challenge that we're now faced with, the generic heading of cybersecurity. And for a non-specialist, I think it's all extraordinary to hear just how many different types of areas are now covered by the generic term of cybersecurity. And I mean, I think for me, one of the key insights from what you're saying is that, of course, it's not the domain of specialists anymore, is it? I mean, almost anybody now, almost in any business, has to have some basic awareness of cybersecurity. Right?
Yeah, it covers everybody. The man on the street, right the way through to the chief executive and all the IT specialists. It covers everybody these days.
Yeah. And am I right in thinking also it's a field which is developing rapidly as well? So part of the challenge is sort of keeping up to date with the latest threats and latest technology.
It is. So I teach a module on cybersecurity to our undergraduate students, and one of the things that we look at is the impact of technology and how it's changed dramatically. And we talk in particular about how firewalls have changed over the years, from being firewalls in the very early days when you would input a keyword, and if somebody then tried to access a website somewhere that had that word, it would block them from having any kind of access. And they were very cumbersome and very difficult to use, and took a lot of setting up and a lot of thought, and very often we got them wrong. So now the fourth generation type firewalls that are now looking at data patterns, so they're taking machine learning type and to an extent some artificial intelligence stuff in there as well. So that they're looking at the patterns of the data, they're looking to see what sort of data comes through our network, building up a picture of what we consider to be good data and what's bad data, so they can pick out malicious packets, the little chunks of data that come through our network. They can pick out those malicious packets and siphon them out to make sure that our networks are better protected. So the changes in the technology involved now is massive. It's changed so dramatically.
So what's interesting
in the
about
last
that
10 years.
Starting to use technology to combat cybersecurity threats itself. So almost taking human out of the equation. That seems to be one of the latest developments in the
Absolutely.
Yvonne, thank you so much for setting the field for us. And if any of our listeners do have any questions about any of the things that we're talking about here, feel free to post it in the chat, and we'll try and pick those up as we're going through the conversation. And Paul, obviously, this is your business, isn't it? So Yvonne has talked about all the kind of the range of different areas and challenges and the developments in cybersecurity. So from your perspective as somebody whose business is cybersecurity, Paul, so what sorts of things are you doing to assist businesses in helping them to combat some of the threats of cybersecurity?
Okay, so I'm picking up something that Yvonne mentioned earlier. Reference cyber. Okay, what is cyber? Let me start there, and then I'll progress on to the type of activities that we're currently doing. So cyber was once upon a time, it was called information security. And if we go back to information security, cyber for me and for the organization that I lead is all about protecting those assets, those information assets. So protection of the business. So cyber can be from the protection of a mobile device to a laptop, to a desktop, to a server, Internet of Things is taking on a life of its own. There's going to be multi-billion IP addresses within the next 1 to 2 years. It's that protection, it's that attack surface that's grown exponentially. So if you look to see what how we interact with our clients in order to keep that attack service manageable, okay, it's all about the fact that the chances are you will, at some point as a business, you will be breached. Most organizations are already breached. It's all about the risk appetite. It's like, how are you protecting those critical information assets? So that can be anywhere from us providing, say, a security managed service. So looking at the monitoring, looking at the detection, and looking on how to respond and also to remediate if a client of ours is actually breached. It's also discovering what your attack surface is as well, and bringing that down to a manageable area. So our biggest client that we look after is a global pharmaceutical company, and they've got 180,000 users in every single corner of the world, and every area of the globe has different data protection laws and data privacy policies. So for instance, if you look at Germany and Austria, they have the right to utilize their work IT assets for personal work, so for personal banking. If you then deploy some kind of monitoring capability on their endpoint, then they invariably, one, they don't like it, and two, you have to then go through a lengthy process in order to get the countries and the company's works council agreements to actually have that capability at their end. To also, on the other side, we look a lot on the educational side. So to keep those people inside an organization sufficiently aware, as Yvonne said, the weakest point in any kind of kill chain when it comes to cyber is the individual. And it's the mistakes that the individuals make that make organizations insecure. And so again, we try and reinforce potential pitfalls and potential mistakes that those people that work for an organization can easily fall into. So it's not just the technical measures, it is the non-technical measures as well. So they go hand in hand. Yeah. And along with the capabilities, along with your intelligent firewalls, and firewalls only block about, I'm sorry, Yvonne, firewalls only block about 30% of bad traffic. Yeah, 30% of bad traffic. The doors ajar, and anybody with the determination to get into your network will get into your network, as I'm sure Simon will probably share with us later on.
We'll come to
the experience that Simon had a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. So, Paula, it's really striking that. So for a non-technician, it sounds quite worrying. So I think I wrote down that you said most organisations are actually already breached, and
correct.
30%. Can you say a bit more about that? So are we actually all fundamentally, at risk here from attacks?
So yeah. So I would say that. So in the last 2 to 3 years, we've had technologies like accelerated threat detection, where we've gone historically over, say, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years worth of organizations' log files, looking for known bad actors that have managed to breach through firewalls, breach through the security perimeter defenses of organizations, looking for the handshaking activities, looking for the connections. And in 90% of all the tests we did, we found that activity. I think the experts out there would also agree that those are the people that don't think they've been breached, then they're like living in cloud cuckoo land. So for me, as I said earlier, it's about the protection of your most critical assets.
Yeah.
So think about what makes your business tick. So for instance, if you're an architect and your crown jewel data could be say 5 gigabytes worth of drawings that you've been doing, say, for the Mayor of London, okay, because of some kind of project that they're running. If you're attacked and you lose those drawings, would it bring down your business? If the answer is yes, then that's your critical data. It's anything that brings down your company, your business, or severely impacts your business, then you should be looking at the protection of those assets. And that's not just making sure you have a secure connection to a router or firewall. It's looking at it proactively and treating it like everything else. So years ago, Craig used to be a pilot and used to talk over the radios, and everything that you didn't want the enemy to hear, you would encrypt. Yeah, so we're moving rapidly with the technologies that we currently routine now encrypted traffic. So via HTTPS on web traffic. So any data in use and data in motion, even your data at rest has to be protected. But all of the kind of communication streams now that we all take for granted should be encrypted. And if you're using any kind of unencrypted capabilities, then again, look at that, especially if you've got critical data, or isolate your data away from those capabilities that you use that may be not so secure.
Paul, thank you for that. That's fascinating. And actually, notwithstanding some of the technical solutions that you've just been describing to us, particularly around encryption, it's also very striking how that cybersecurity now is a governance strategic risk. It's part of any company's strategic risk register in terms of the ICT risks. And also, it's almost kind of politics as well. You just touched a little bit on that as well. So it's, I think if you consider cybersecurity simply to be a technical issue, then obviously you're clearly mistaken on that. And so, Paul, thank you for that. And I'll come back to that, because actually I think it would be quite interesting to know where you believe the threat is coming from. And perhaps we'll come back to that a little later. But Simon, we've heard from our experts in the field of cybersecurity, so it's giving us a bit of an overview of what the field is, what the threats are, what some of the solutions are to those threats. But you're, in a sense, with your two hats on, as the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, but you've also been suffered from an attack as well, haven't you? So perhaps we could just hear a bit of your perspective on what you've heard so far as a business owner and as somebody who's also suffered an attack. And perhaps we could say a bit about that.
Yeah, I suppose as a business owner, you're more highlighted to some of the threats or some of the issues that are about. And I think as part of the process that we went through in terms of having an attack and then speaking to other people, I've been particularly open about it. You do find that more people have gone through a similar or same issue as we had. They're open about it. Certainly at the time we were unlucky enough. There was still a case that it was a little bit almost dirty. It was something that you shouldn't admit to in terms of a happening. Maybe it's unprofessional, etc. But we felt quite the opposite at the time. We're a membership organisation. We felt that there was a duty that we had to inform our members that there had been an issue. That I suppose the benefit to ourselves was that we didn't lose any data. There wasn't any issue or threat to either our staff or to our members because data wasn't lost. But it did highlight it could happen to us, it could happen to any of our members as well. So we felt it was a duty, and hence me coming on this webinar, hence me telling this story quite a lot elsewhere. I still think there is a place to make sure that others are aware that it can happen to you. And if it does happen to you, it has a really significant consequence on the business, on your people and on your potential clients or stakeholders as well.
Mm. So that's great, Simon, and I really appreciate you taking the opportunity to come and tell us about it. So would you give us just an idea of what happened and what the consequences were for your business?
Yeah, it's a couple of years ago now. So some security things have moved on then, but I think some of the principles are still fairly key. In essence, we ran a Microsoft Office system based in an office, and we had remote workers as well. At the time, we just moved premises, and we had a number of tenants that we took from our old premise to the new ones where we were. We got to a place at the start of the year where we felt we'd sorted out the move, and we were looking forward to going on into the new year, when things just started to not be right with the main computer system. Some bits didn't work. We'd referred those on to our IT people, and they came back with a normal switch it off, start it up, and just make sure it was okay. But there was clearly something adrift, and over the weekend the system had to be closed down, and it soon became clear that we had an issue with it. When we came back after the weekend, switching on the machines on them, there was a note from a malicious person to say that we'd actually got a ransom. This was malware, in particular ransomware. They were asking us for, at the time, around 8,000 bitcoins, and if we were to pay that, then they would allow the system to be reconfigured, and it would go back to normal after that. We couldn't do anything at that stage. So if you think of that, we had to close down everything. So we hadn't got access to the internet, we hadn't got access to shared drives, to emails, to common data, because before that we'd actually gone on a campaign of putting all our data online. So we were ransomed at that particular stage. We had options at that stage. We could have paid the ransom. We didn't, because we felt that A, that was the wrong thing to do, and B, where would that money go to if we were to pay it? Fortunately, in the December before that January, I'd taken the advice of our insurance person and spent £150 on an insurance policy. What that insurance policy did allow us to do is to have some sort of normality regained over a period of time. And why I say that is that it wasn't just the ransomware that we closed down all the systems and tried to disinfect them as such, but we also had an issue that was concurrent with our backup. Now, like everybody, we had a backup. We made sure that we had a number of backup tapes. So you take one home just to make sure the building doesn't burn down overnight and you've got no way to recover. Yeah. But we had about 4 or 5 backup tapes, so which when we put them back in to try and get back up to normal, all of them were corrupted. So whilst we thought we were safe and we were able to return to normal, we had our system that we couldn't get into, and we had data that was locked, but we had no way of recovering back from what we thought was our ideal, our 5 or so backup tapes. Insurance paid for some form of trying to decrypt. We sent it off to a specialist, and they threw lots of numbers at the encryption. It didn't work. They took probably 6 weeks, and you put all your hopes and aspirations in that's all your data that's going to be coming back in one go. But that's not necessarily a great point to be at. I suppose the sort of things why you're in that period, of what really concerns you is that you've got people there, you've got your team, you've got your members, you've got your board, and there are concerns at different levels there, because people are concerned that it might have a reputational impact on your business, concerned because it will have a long-term financial impact on the viability of the organisation, so they're scared about their jobs. As I say, the reputational bit, we decided to be very open. We are aware of other organisations that had similar issues at the time, and it is public knowledge. The county council did just before us, and we reached out to them and just tried to understand what processes they went through and what we could learn from them as well. We had things like a disaster recovery plan in place, but they necessarily weren't focused around a disaster that was based around a computer system. It was more if the building was flooded and we couldn't get in, or was it a fire or another sort of threat. So we had all those challenges at that particular time, and to cut a long story short, eventually through the insurance policy, through our team rebuilding the data, we've never actually got that data back. We had got to a stage where we were able to get to a working form again, but it cost us around £40,000 in terms of lost revenue, in terms of hours for staff to get us back to where we were, and improvements in terms of the technology that we had to implement after that. So
a really significant problem for a business of that size, in a sense. So So Simon, I think that's a great example of where you've done an awful lot already as a business to try and protect yourself, and yet they still got through. And picking up on something Paul mentioned earlier, I think one of our conclusions here that really any business is at risk, and all I think you can do is minimise that risk by taking the protection. We'll come back and talk a bit about what that looks like in a minute. So Simon, thank you for presenting the case for us and being so open with the particular issue that you have, which I think really does bring the conversation directly to home to a live case. So I appreciate that. And Yvonne, perhaps I can bring you back in at this point, because I think what we've done is we've sort of set the field of cybersecurity, and I think we've uncovered the range of different areas that are covered by cybersecurity. I think Paul has described some of the different ways that companies are at threat from cyber issues. Simon's given us a good case of it. Now, in the current circumstances, Yvonne, can you tell us if there's anything that is of particular threat or risk at this moment? I mean, I think technology now, of course, we're all using it much more perhaps than we were even 2 months ago. But is there anything that you're seeing that really is representing a very up-to-date threat over the last 3 or 4 months or so, and what that looks like? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, very much so. We've seen a massive increase in what we term social engineering, and in particular a part of cybersecurity that's known as phishing. These are scam emails that people will send to try and get all sorts of information from employees, typically. So they're looking to try and elicit things like personal information, usernames, passwords, and ultimately to get bank details. These take various forms. So the two that we've seen an awful lot of a massive increase. And I'm not talking about, sort of they keep a track of these things. So you're not talking about maybe an increase of 200 or 300. You're talking about an increase of 10 or 15,000 of these things per week currently. And I'll come back to the reason why that is happening. But there are two things that are happening with these. So the first one is that they send a scam email. It looks for personal information. It gets you to hit a button, and then it says, input various bits of information here. So it then starts to ask you for things like your bank account information. And it claims to be verifying you as a particular user, as a particular person. We need this information to verify your identity, and then we'll let you do the next step of the process. Well, what actually happens is it stops at that point. They've then got your personal information. They'll hang on to that, and they'll use it later on and take funds from you at some other later stage. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of is a little attachment that works in a very kind of similar way ultimately, but it will appear as an attachment in an email, as a Word document. And a lot of these are being labelled as we'll pay you back so much money because you've been affected by COVID-19. Or if you have a look at this attachment, it will give you all sorts of information about how to deal with COVID-19. And there's an awful lot of these sort of threads that are appearing in these very sort of narrow categories. And again, this is all about eliciting as much personal information out of people as is possible. The reason that this is happening is because hackers are seeing what's currently happening across the globe as being a potential vulnerability, and this is a global vulnerability. So people are at a very, very difficult stage. They're incredibly vulnerable. They're incredibly weak in what they're doing and decision making and thinking. And the psychological effect of dealing with something, the pandemic essentially, means that you don't pay attention to what's happening in the minutiae. So you're not looking at what comes into your inbox necessarily. You're not looking at what you click. You're not reading through things properly. And because of that, you then become a very vulnerable person. So not only are you vulnerable to this incredibly nasty virus, but you're also incredibly vulnerable to any hacker that's out there that is trying to get any sort of personal information. And it's a massive problem. And it's all about, again, it comes back to people being very much cyber aware and about just being vigilant about watching what they're clicking, reading through emails, looking to see what the content is, and being able to identify one from another. There was a lovely example I showed to the students a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about this in great detail. And it was an example that had been sent as a text message from the government. And they said, claim this amount of money and you can click here and go to our website. When you looked at this website, you practically couldn't tell it apart from a standard government interface. It looked almost identical. And then you sort of do realise how easy it is to catch people out. But when you start digging down, you start looking for the little tiny things. So it could just be something like a letter or a number that's different in the address in the URL, that sets it apart from a standard government way of writing that kind of format, or just the terminology that's used, or just the wording of a sentence. And that the tiniest little things that you have to be very vigilant and very aware to pick up on to realise this is not genuine. Otherwise, some of them are really difficult to tell apart. And that's kind of the main thing that we're seeing at the moment. The increase in those sorts of attacks is absolutely massive. It's gone up something like 150% in a 2-month period. It's just incredibly insane. And it's affecting not just people, but it's affecting companies, organisations.
So, Yvonne, I've seen a sharp increase in a threat surface called Smishing. And that's when people are getting a random SMS text. So even now, the format for the COVID-19 testing now is predominantly done over text messaging. And you get the COVID-19 message, SMS, and then it will tell you what to do. And invariably, the SMS drives you to a website. And there's a few of these smishing ones now, especially with many more of us who are in the process of undergoing testing or have been testing, that will look like it's a legitimate text. You then click on it, it then opens up a web page, and then it asks you for the information. And what it does is basically try to ask you a little bit, slightly more information that you would put in initially when you first go on to register for a test. And then on the password, it will ask you for your password. The first thing people will do is scratch their head and go, oh, crikey, what password did I put in? And then they will put in their usual passwords, because most people only have 2 passwords. They will put in both their passwords. Then it will drive you down into, hey, this has to be a capital letter, it has to have a special character, and it has to have figures. And so therefore they're thinking, yeah, that's a little bit like my banking password, I must have used that. And before they've known it, they've had 5 attempts and they've given all of their passwords. And that's what Yvonne said, that reconnaissance platform that these attack these foreign states, or it could be, it's more likely to be foreign states than say a normal script kiddie or it's a hacker sitting on the outside, because these are coordinated, sophisticated attacks. And then this information is used for some time in the future, because then they can get into your internet banking, your Amazon accounts, even Spotify, okay, and slowly they can start to extract some kind of payment from the individual.
Also, this smishing thing, is that a very new thing then, and it's specifically related?
I wouldn't say it's new. It's been out for, I reckon it's been out for about a year.
Yeah,
a year. It's relatively new.
Relatively new.
But it's getting more and more prevalent out there. Yeah.
And so coming back to something Yvonne was saying, that people that these attackers are taking advantage of the current situation by using the COVID-19 as the theme, or as the reason for sending these attacks and these messages. So that's I mean, I think it's quite astonishing, just the scale that Yvonne's talking about in terms of the current threat. And something that I was particularly struck by what you said, Yvonne, is just the hyper-vigilance that's required, isn't it, to be able to identify something which is a phishing attack or a smishing attack? Because I mean, my impression as a sort of user, if you like, is that they're becoming very sophisticated in the way that they go about this. Actually, they're becoming increasingly harder to detect as an attack.
Yeah.
Is that what your expertise suggests?
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's a lot of this is backed up as well by the fact that most organisations have somebody who's fairly IT savvy.
Yeah.
And this can range from somebody who's maybe come out of college or come out of university, has got a good knowledge of how to use systems, starts work as a network administrator, and is the go-to person. And it can be just that one person, or scaled up to an entire IT team. But what we see an awful lot that's lacking in these areas is the level of expertise that's required to manage these sorts of systems effectively. And that comes down to training, and it comes down to staff knowledge. Because how can you protect a system effectively and understand what technologies are available, what platforms you could use, what kind of infrastructure you need to be able to support what the company is doing to protect the assets, and to make sure that you are dealing with the latest technologies that will protect the network and protect all your data. If you don't have that level of knowledge or that capability, and that seems to be a prevalent theme that's running through cybersecurity as well at the moment. You know, it's recognised, and it has been for a long time, that there is a massive shortage of skills in this area. And if you look across the board, there's a lot of universities that offer programs in, undergraduate and at master's level and beyond, that offer programs in cybersecurity and advanced networking, so that we can upskill people to be in that kind of position. But it's going to take us a long time. And the problem about cybersecurity is that the people who are in the technology roles are always going to be a long way behind what is actually happening on the other side, on the dark side. Yeah.
And I know, Paul, you were saying earlier that you've got 4 of our own students working with you at the moment. Is that right?
So my best recruitment arm at the moment, Craig, is Yvonne. So Yvonne identifies the talent and then gives us the head up, and then we have a chat with them.
But if you've not done your young grad degree covering cybersecurity, which obviously covers the vast majority of people in businesses, then something I think you mentioned earlier, Paul, which is, I mean, obviously awareness is critical, isn't it? I mean, we've had a couple of questions in just saying, what can organisations do with their staff just to minimise the risk of somebody actually going through the process, Paul, that you just described?
Yeah.
So just to be, because if you're working in an organisation and you let in an attacker via that phishing attack or smishing attack, then of course they have access to your organisation's computer systems, presumably, and it's not just a personal risk in terms of giving your own data away. It's an organisation risk. Have I got that right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's nothing worse than having an authenticated user on the inside roaming all over your network, access to all the drives, all of the shares, all of the sensitive information. And then for a lot of organizations in that situation, it's like, how are they then protecting themselves that that's not happening? So this goes back to a lot of the threat intelligence that Yvonne was talking about. It's looking at the anomaly detection within organizations. Back to your question about what somebody made about how can organizations get that knowledge. There's a lot of free resources out there. Once every 2 months, back in the old world, before COVID-19, when we used to do bi-monthly seminars, we invited them out, and invariably we'd get about between 50 and 80 local representatives from local businesses. And the last one we did, for instance, at the university, one before that, we had Simon as guest speaker as well, when we did one at Mosaic. And that educational, those type of activities are all free, so we don't make a charge for them. There's a lot of resources out there on the internet, but it's like to find out which resources you can trust, because not all the information you find on the internet it is valid.
So how do you do that?
Of
it's a business owner or a CEO like Simon, for example, who's been through this process already. I mean, how do I know what I can trust? Because we've talked about the degree of strategic risk here. Is there a way of telling you can trust to help me to protect my business?
Trusted resources, like if you're pretty much at a loss, then I'd go to the National Cybersecurity Centre. They have some real high level, plain common sense guides on how businesses can at least help themselves, how to protect themselves, how to do the basics, safe home working, safe remote working, and it's a good place to start.
Okay. And things that a small company, anybody from you said your smallest clients is a 2-person company, so anybody from that size of a company can go to the National Cybersecurity Centre. They can have a look at what there's available there on their site and start to help educate their staff, which seems to be one of our key themes here, doesn't it? About making sure they're kept up to date about the very latest type of threat that they're likely to be faced with.
Absolutely. So also locally as well. So some good resources locally. You've got the FSB, so the Federation of Small Businesses. There's a regionalised cyber forum that comes out of that FSB, and they also meet about once every 2 to 3 months, and that's a good font of knowledge for cybersecurity. I know Simon is looking at bolstering the services through the Chamber of Commerce to be a lot more cyber aligned with the membership side as well. And so I think Simon's also undertaking that as a task in the very, very near future. But there is a lot of resources out there. People have just got to look, and it's there.
Yeah, that's great, Paul. Thank you for that. Yvonne, our undergraduates, are we? I mean, we've heard that you've got a few working for Paul already. I mean, do we provide any university services in this regard, or are undergrads going out doing placements, for example, in business looking at cybersecurity? How's that work?
Yeah, we have a mixture. But I mean, that's, I suppose, the key thing you have to remember is that students that come to us want to study a computer science program. So they're doing a little bit of everything that, from a lot of different areas of computer science. And cybersecurity is just one of those opportunities that they get. So we do it as a level 3 module. We also have a master's module. We have a master's module that sits in the MSc governance in the business school as well. And we're looking to develop a master's program for cybersecurity in the near future. So, all these things will help with dealing with things like the skills shortage. But yeah, we do have a lot of students that will come to us and say, oh, I'm interested in networking, or I'm interested in cyber. What can I do about it? Can I do my final year project here? Where can I go for a placement? And we have a number now, and it's an increasing number. And the interest has sparked. I mean, I've been with the university now just over 3 years. And the interest in this area has sparked massively. And year on year, I have more and more students coming to me and saying, I want to know more about the subject. What graduate positions are there? Who can I apply to? We've now got students that have been. Sorry about that. We've now got students that are working for. Rafferty's ball is hungry. We've now got students that have been working for Sophos down in Oxford, who are a major player in the antivirus world. We've got students that are doing cyber and related studies at BT. Where else have we got them currently? The big players. Of course, Paul's always very good at taking them, and he'll help them out with project stuff, with questions, with all kinds of bits and pieces. Of course, we've got 4 that are working for him. They're now scattered all over the place, so that we've got students coming into us and doing all kinds of placements and all sorts of interesting stuff.
It's great. Yeah. So it's an area which is strong and growing for us, I think, in that sense.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
Which is good to hear.
Yeah.
And so I think perhaps one for Paul, just to finish off this discussion about what the solutions are. So you talk about a lot of free resources available in terms of that sort of education, both of business owners and possibly, I guess, employees as well. I mean, what else are businesses doing to protect themselves? I mean, I'm just thinking of an example. The university now has multi-factor authentication, which as an employee can be a bit of a pain. But I think we know that adds a level of security. I mean, is that the kind of thing that a small business can do? Are there more technical solutions available for? Can you say a bit about that? Is there anything else that we should be acknowledging as a sort of must go-to solution for cybersecurity?
Sure. So a lot of the technical solutions, if you again look around, they're available. So something that we've done recently, around about a month ago, is we working with small businesses, and we can provide a protection capability, for all of the endpoints that a small business may have. So if a small business, say, has 20 endpoints, I'm talking about an endpoint being anything from a mobile device to a laptop or a server, and we can deploy our capability on that, and that's for free. Okay, that's for as long as the COVID-19 pandemic, where people are working from home and they're more exposed, they're more at risk, then with our technology provider, and we predominantly use an organization called F-Secure, who are a big Finnish technical provider of antivirus, of endpoint detection response, and we utilize their technical platform, and we've got the agreement from them that if anybody wants to have this capability for 3 months for free, then they can reach out for us, and then we can sort them out. We've done about a dozen of those in about the last week. We've helped youngsters who are working from home, either a few university kids who felt a little bit exposed, and help them with their kind of remote working. We've also done a lot of free stuff for charitable organizations. So again, this is all on our LinkedIn page, so I don't want to keep harping on about what we've done, but there is help out there. People don't have to pay for it. All it is free help.
That's really interesting, Paul. Apologies, there's a very slight delay in the line, but I think that for me the key thing there actually is that the companies don't actually have to pay anything to get a basic level of coverage and security, either from an educational point of view in the way that we talk, or actually from some of the more technical solutions that you can direct companies to if they're looking for support, and individuals, not necessarily just companies.
Absolutely.
So I think that we've got a few interesting messages there. From Simon's case, really anybody here now is at risk, particularly at the moment. We've heard from Yvonne about how these organizations and individuals are taking advantage of the psychological weakness that maybe some companies and individuals are suffering from at the moment, and really targeting. It seems like a perfect storm here. Really quite scary numbers about the increased level of threats that we're experiencing right now. But actually, a lot of solutions available, both technical solutions, educational solutions, that companies can exploit without actually having to spend anything on it, which I think is really heartening to hear, because that's the question that I think companies will be asking themselves: how can I be resilient against these threats? So that's great. And Simon, to come back to you, because in a sense, I suppose you and we're the users of this of cybersecurity in a sense, rather than the experts. I mean, in a sense, what's your perspective now as a business leader in what you've heard, and has it generated any thoughts for you about what advice you would give to businesses on this conversation about cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity really to reflect, I think, and what I mean by that is that certainly when I was back in 2017 and we were just moving buildings, I got all my thoughts in terms of the day-to-day running of the business, and whilst I paid for my security protection, I felt a certain amount of safeness that I'd done enough to be comfortable in terms of the systems that we got running at that time. The more I look into and the more I take the challenges that it can bring into account, the more I feel we need to push this particular issue up the agenda. So in terms of making sure that it's on a risk register within the company, making sure that companies have got it within their disaster recovery plans, and they have chance to test those disaster recovery plans. Now I think gives us potentially a little bit of a time to think about it in a slightly different way. It probably will give us a chance, maybe some part of the team where there's a little bit of resource that's underutilized at this stage, to focus on this particular area. Yeah. But again, why I wanted to be part of today, why I wanted to get some input, is it can happen to you. It can have significant detrimental effect on your business. And therefore, if by hearing the sort of pressures and sort of pains that we went through, just make somebody think, actually, I probably ought to find out a little bit more about what's on the National Cybersecurity Centre website. Yeah. I ought to get my team to think about on a more regular basis some of the threats that are coming into their inbox on a daily basis. Hopefully that would have been a value both to this and as I can provide as well.
Simon, thank you so much for that, and really interesting your comment about which I've heard expressed as, there's maybe an opportunity for business owners to work on their business as well as work in their business, which is thinking a little bit about the nature of your organisation, taking a bit of a step back, thinking about where the threats are, where the opportunities are, particularly to make your business more resilient, and this is obviously a key area for every business, actually. So a real opportunity just to reflect a little bit whether your business is actually as resilient as it can be to some of the threats that our experts have described for us. So Simon, thank you for that. And I know that Chamber of Commerce are also thinking a little bit about the information that you can provide also for businesses on cybersecurity. So I'm sure that'll be much appreciated as well. So colleagues, I think we could obviously talk all afternoon about this, and I think we need to draw the conversation to a close. So I think it remains for me just to thank you all so much for your contribution. Thank you for elucidating the nature of the threat, the scale of the threat, and the areas of opportunities for businesses to combat that threat. I think we've both raised the issue, and I think we've also given some advice about what businesses need to do to think about protecting themselves from it. And I think that's really very valuable for all of us. So thank you so much for agreeing to participate in our conversation this afternoon ensuring business continuity. And with that, I shall pass back over to our host, Rishi. Rishi?
Thank you so much. What an enjoyable and enlightening conversation. So, it remains to add to what Craig just said, that thank you so much, Yvonne, Simon, Paul, for so openly sharing, openly sharing incidents, openly sharing, tech controls and people's responsibilities individually, and also the resources, organizations in Greater Lincolnshire and beyond can depend on to keep their businesses safe and keep them, continuing to the best of their ability. So I really want to also thank our audience today. Do remember, you can, share the links, these recordings wide, such that, a lot of people get the benefit of the content that was on today. And of course, thanks so much for so well and guiding the conversation to make it truly valuable. I would like to just take a minute to let our listeners know where we're going next week, because next week we have a very exciting week with 2 activities lined up for us to learn from and to share. The first one is episode 3 of this Business Beyond the Curve interview series, which is actually a very interesting and relevant one yet again, like the one on cybersecurity, which is titled Sustainability of the Supply Chain to COVID-19. And we're very pleased that our new global professor at the Lincoln International Business School, the professor in sustainable operations and supply chain management, would be leading this for us. We're very pleased to have that. That would be on Tuesday, the 5th of May at 10 o'clock in the morning. So it's an expert panel led by Charbel, our global professor. And the second opportunity to join in with us is on the executive education series, which is titled Potential Business Models Beyond the Pandemic. So which is our researchers actually beginning to look at business models that organizations can consider beyond this time in history that we are in. And that is on Wednesday, the 6th of May at 11:30 in the morning. And our academic Francesca would be leading that conversation for us. So on that note, and with that exciting content to look forward to, it only remains to close this session and to thank our panelists and thank Craig once again. And thank you all for attending. I really appreciate it. And do keep the conversations flowing. Stay safe and see you again.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.